All right, guys, so now we're at the part of the application where we have to basically load our user. We have to get the user data from the back end and put it into our state so that we can basically validate our authentication so we can access certain areas, in this case, the home page, which right now isn't protected, but we'll get to that after. So this load user here, this is the authstate.js file. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this and open up some curly braces, and let's make this async because we're making a request to the back end. Now we're going to want to set our token into basically into a global header. You know how we have to send the token within headers like this to a route that's protected? Well, I don't want to have to do that within every method, like when we fetch contacts and add a contact. So we're going to set it as a global header within Axios, and we're going to have a special file that does that. And we're going to load it right here. So I'm just going to put a to-do, and let's just say load token into global headers. Okay, so we'll do that after, but let's now make our request. So we're going to do a try catch, and let's say const res, and we'll say await axios.get. We're making a get request to /API/auth, which is that route that will just basically check your token and see if you're actually a valid user. So if that comes back okay, then we're going to go ahead and dispatch, and we're going to set a type of user loaded. Okay, and then the payload is going to be res.data, and that's the actual user data. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Actually, let's format this like that. Now in the catch, if something goes wrong, basically invalid credentials or whatever, well, then we're going to dispatch the auth error type. All right. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to go to my auth reducer, and we're going to handle both of these. So for the let's see, for the load user, or the user loaded rather, let's see, we already brought that in. So let's put that up at the top here. So we'll say case user loaded, and in that case we're going to return spread the state, and then let's set is authenticated to true and loading to false. And then we want the user data, which is going to go inside user, and that's what we get from the payload, from the response. So we're going to set the user here. All right, now if it's an auth error, then we're going to do the same exact thing that we did with a register fail. We're going to remove the token and just basically reset everything. So we'll also say case auth error here. Do the same thing. All right, now in order to make this request to API auth, we need a token. It's a private route, remember? So if we look under routes auth.js, this is a private route. So we need to send a token, and remember what I said, I want to store a global header with that token. And we're going to have to call that here, but we're going to put this in a separate file. So I'm going to create a new folder, and this is going to go in our source, in our client source. Just close this up so you can see this clearly. So inside source, I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it utils. And inside utils, we'll have a file, and we're going to call this set auth token.js. Now this set auth token is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to check to see if a token is passed in. If it is, then we're going to set it to the global header. If not, then we're going to delete it from the global header. So we need Axios for this. And we'll say const, we'll create a function here called set auth token, and it's going to take in a token. And then what we want to do is just check to see, we just want to say if token. And if so, then we're going to call axios.defaults. I said global, but I guess it's a default header. So defaults.header or headers, and then .common. And remember, the key that we use to send a token is x-auth-token. And we're going to set that to whatever the token is. All right. Else, then we want to delete it. So we'll say delete axios.defaults.headers.common and x-auth-token. So we want to delete that if there's not a token passed in. And then finally, we just want to export this as default and save it. And now we just want to bring this into our auth state because we're going to basically call it right here. So in our auth state, let's go up above here and let's import set auth token. And that's from, we want to go up 2 levels into utils and then set auth token. And inside of our load user now, let's replace this. And we're going to check local storage. So if local storage dot token, so if that exists, then we're going to call set auth token. And we want to pass in, excuse me, local storage dot token. Now we want to call it here, and then we want to call it in one other place, and that's going to be the main app.js, because we want this to load every single time our main component loads. And the place to have this run is going to be, actually we can just have it run right here above the function. So I'm going to bring in that set auth token. Let's bring it in right, we'll go down here, I guess. And let's import set auth token. It's going to be ./utils/set auth token. And then I'm simply going to I'm going to do the same thing I did in the auth state, just this if statement right here. And we'll let that run here. Now I want to go back to my register, okay, where we registered the user and we dispatch, register success, we do all that. And then after that dispatch, I actually want to call load user. Okay, so it'll call this function here. So let's go ahead and save this. Now, once we register, we should get logged in. It should get the token, it should load the user, then the isAuthenticated value should be true. So I'm going to go back into my register component because I want it to redirect if we're authenticated. So components register.js, and we can bring in isAuthenticated from our auth context. So is authenticated, and we can put this in our use effect. So right above where we checked for the error, let's say if, and let's say if is authenticated, then we're going to redirect. We're going to say, let's see, we have to use, to redirect in React, we use our props dot history dot push, and I'm going to redirect to the home page, right, the dashboard. Now, since we have a couple more things in use effect that we're depending on, such as isAuthenticated and props.history, it's going to give us some messages unless we add them down here. So let's add isAuthenticated and props.history. I think that will stop. Let's see. Props is not defined. That's because props get passed in right here, and we don't have that being passed in. Okay, so right here it says React hook use effect has missing dependencies, clear errors, and set alert. So we don't actually want to add these as dependencies because it will cause a never-ending loop. So what we want to do to get rid of these warnings is go right above this line here and put in a comment of ESLint dash disable dash next dash line. So I'll save that, and then that should get rid of those. Good. So now once we register the user, it should call right here load user, and it should get the user from the back end. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just delete, let's see, let's reload MongoDB, and I'm going to delete Sam Smith and just re-register him. So let's delete, and just to make sure, go to application and make sure that you don't have any token in your local storage right now. So we're just kind of setting everything to default here. All right, and then I'm going to open up my Redux tool, my React tools, and go to auth state context provider. And once we register with Sam Smith, he should get put inside of this user value. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say Sam Smith. Okay, so let's register. We get redirected because when that is authenticated value is true, and then inside token we have our token, and then inside user we have Sam's info. Now what's going to happen is when I reload this, the user is going to go away because we're not calling load user on this page. So if I reload and we take a look down here, we still have the token in storage and in state, but the user is null and is authenticated is back to null, and we don't want that. So all we have to do is call load user when this page loads. So I'm going to go to, let's see, what's that, the home page, right, which is the dashboard. So let's go to components, pages, home.js, and let's bring in our auth context. Okay, not auth state, auth context. Okay, and then we'll go down here and initialize it. Bring in the use context hook. And I don't know if any of you guys took my old React front to back course before hooks were available, before this use context. When we used the context API, it was a mess. Like when you had to use render props and all that stuff, it was a mess to be able to use context. But this hook really makes it nice and clean. So now we can call any method or piece of state from our context. Now I'm gonna actually run this in the use effect. So let's go ahead and bring in use effect. And we're going to put this right here because we want this to run as soon as the component loads. So we're going to call auth context, and we want to call load user. So that will look at the token, and it will hit the back end, validate it, and put the user into state. That's what should happen. And we only want this to run when the component loads, so we're going to put a pair of empty brackets. Now it's going to complain about dependencies, but we don't want to put load user as a dependency. So I'm going to go ahead and add right here the ESLint dash disable dash next line. So now I want to basically try the process over again. Actually, I think if we reload and check it out, yeah, our user is there. And the reason that it's there now once we reload it is because load user is now running, or it ran, and it looked at our token and it hit the back end and validated it. And now if we look at is authenticated, it's true. So now we're going to stay authenticated. Okay, so no matter if we reload or whatever, we're going to stay authenticated. So now that we can register and authenticate. In the next video, we want to work on our login form, because right now we don't have a way to actually authenticate with a user that's already in the database. I don't want to keep having to register new users, so we want to be able to log in. We also need a way to log out and basically destroy everything that's in the state. All right, so we'll get to that next.